All right, so I'm able to see how many people join us on the upper left-hand side, so I'll just let you know. And okay, so Max, with this being nominated in this way, does it enable you to, will you be able to serve as an advocate in a different capacity, or will you get different platforms to share your message?
Yeah, so I mean, a big part of the Diana Award as well is, you know, once you get the award as well, you sort of become an ambassador for them, which means I'll be involved in a lot more opportunities and probably be given more platforms to sort of speak about my message and speak about, you know, autism and employment, autism in education, autism in environment. You know, it just enables you, I think, to have those more platforms, but also to be able to network with a lot more people as well, because there's always issues, you know, that other people are always, you know, fighting for, and they've all got their missions as well. And sometimes you'll often find that their mission can actually coincide your mission, you know, and there'll be a link. So being a Diana recipient sort of opens the doors for all of that. Gives that more ambassador work, that side of stuff as well. And, you know, I'll be working heavily with them to make sure that I'm sort of doing everything that I can and getting involved in anywhere that I can, to make a difference for autistic people, but also, you know, other people's missions and supporting them through it, you know, because sort of got sometimes, you know, help each other to sort of get all of your voices heard. So, and that'd be my goal, I think, working with the Diana Awards, you know, that'd be my main mission, to make sure that, well, everybody's voice is heard and everyone's missions getting noticed and getting realised, really.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. It was really wonderful to hear what it's meant to you, and yeah, I'm really excited to see where it brings you. I know you have lots of coinciding work always happening. So yeah, I think I'll start our session. Okay, so hi everyone and welcome. This talk today is the latest in SenTalk's series of speaking events. It's called Sen Explained, and we are in partnership with professionals and lay people and everyone in between to discuss special educational needs. My name is Blunza, and I work for the London-based nonprofit called SenTalk. We aim to improve social and emotional outcomes and promote inclusion for children and young people with additional needs and their families. Today, I'm delighted to have Max Green here to talk with me about the reality of education, employment, and environment for the autistic community at large, and how these have come into play in his life. Following our talk, which will last around 30 to 40 minutes, there'll be a question and answer session for another 10 to 15 if anyone wants to contribute or ask. So feel free to ask questions at any time during the webinar by typing in the chat box to the right of the screen, or feel free to comment down below and continue the conversation with the recording. The recording of the webinar will be made available to watch on YouTube immediately after the live session ends today. So that's the end of the housekeeping introduction. So welcome, Max. It's a pleasure to have you here today. I thought we could start off, if you could start off by introducing yourself a bit and telling us about your work. That might be a big question.
No, thank you ever so much for having me. So yeah, I'm Max J. Green. I'm a autistic ambassador. I ambassador for the National Autistic Society. I'm also a expert panelist member for Dimensions UK. Just been awarded the Diana Award, and now I'm an ambassador for the Diana Award as well, and also do a bit of ambassador work for Wrestling Travel, just because I love wrestling, and you know, I always feel that there's a lot of people like myself out there that are autistic, you know, that may like wrestling, that may like, you know, sports, that may like theatre. And if there's anything that I can do to sort of put practices in place to make them feel more comfortable when they sign up to sort of these companies, you know, that will, because I mean, Wrestling Travel is more of a sort of, I suppose, a sort of wrestling holiday service, you know, so anything that they can do to make it more easy for an autistic person is sort of where I come in, and it's where a lot of my ambassador work comes in. But I've done speeches up at Parliament, all the way to festivals, events, schools, colleges, universities. Done a few speeches for Talk in the past as well. And around all of my ambassador work is just really getting government to realise, getting employers to realise, getting education to realise, you know, what things can be put in place to help an autistic person, and how do we achieve that, and you know, what sort of steps do we need to take to get to that place.
Great. Sorry, my computer's cutting out. Hopefully
That's all right.
You're finished there. Thank you for that intro. That was really nice to hear. Yeah, so where do we begin? So I thought it might be sort of fitting to ask, if you feel comfortable, would you like to share a bit about your diagnoses and what your experience has been like coming to learn about them? I thought it might set the tone.
No, absolutely. So I've got autism, ADHD, OCD, and epilepsy, and I always make the joke of saying that the doctor just loves to give me conditions. I mean, I've always known that I can't really remember a time where I didn't know that I had my conditions. I was always sort of made aware of them by my parents, you know, that I think the first way that my mum explained it was, you know, my brain works like this and everyone else's brain sort of works like that, and while mine's still going, that one just worked in it. And that's how I was sort of first explained autism. I think because there was such a sort of lack of knowledge as well around autism, and I think every parent will find this. The parents all sort of automatically become the experts because they're always challenged by the fact that there's no one really around them that are able to help them or understand it. And that was sort of my mum. You know, I couldn't speak till I was 6 either. So, you know, the telltale sign for my mum was the fact that I could just pick up a game and play this game and know my way around a map, but I couldn't then, you know, communicate with my mum till I was 6. And she always just thought, there's something there, you know, something that's stopping him from being able to sort of communicate. So I think, you know, my autism diagnosis was the first, and I always say to people that I think the one thing that the sort of medical system gets wrong is they take very, very long to diagnose you with a condition. But in my experience, the minute you get a condition, they're very quick to diagnose you with other labels, and they're very quick also to prescribe medication. Because a little bit later on, I was diagnosed with ADHD, and they decided to put me on medicine for that. Instead of doing any sort of therapy or anything that could be more helpful than just, you know, here's some medication, try this. So, and I always try and speak about medicine because the medicine in the end gave me a form of Tourette's. So I had tics, and obviously growing up in school, being autistic, ADHD, and then having tics wasn't hard enough making friends already, let alone having something else. And then I found out I had OCD. That was at primary school as well, so all around the same time. And then later on in life, I got diagnosed with epilepsy. I was at college at the time, and I was upstairs in my room, and then I just had an epileptic fit, and that was when we found out I had I had epilepsy as well. The doctors later said after that could have been caused by medication that for my ADHD, because apparently it does lower the threshold of you having a fit. So this is sort of why I always speak a little bit about medicine, because I always think if you can do anything to prevent medicine before you get to that stage, I'd always recommend it, because the side effects can be quite bad and can lead to other things. So yeah, I mean, those are my diagnoses as of late. You know, it's not changed for a little while now, so hopefully, you know, there's none other surprise ones coming in. But yeah, you know, as I say, I learned very early on. Luckily, my mum did get into the position where we could get a formal diagnosis and educational health and care plan in place before I sort of went 20 or 30 years, you know, as some people do, without getting that diagnosis. So yeah, I think I was very fortunate there to sort of have that in place.
That sounds like it would be a lot, sort of growing up with
Wasn't easy.
having to navigate these conditions and these experiences. You know, at the same time trying to understand yourself. Who am I in relation to these things? It's quite a lot. Would you say, you mentioned the EHCP, would you say, did things sort of clarify when it came to getting the support in school once you got that EHCP? What did it kind of look like?
That's a good question. I think it gave more clarity for my mum in terms of she now has this sort of confirmation of what she has suspected that it could be. And I think for a parent that is worth its weight, because it's just that clarity and it's that confirmation that you need. And also it gives schools and it gives employers and everyone else later in life what they sort of might need to do. The downside to that is you can give them all this sort of work and this evidence, but when it comes to enforcing it and putting it in place is a little bit different. And I'd say that's probably where every school I went to, apart from one, really failed at, you know, was schools are really, I think, confined by, you know, we can't have one rule for one and the other. And I always think, well, it's not about having one rule for one and the other. It's about putting the support that one person may need that somebody else might not need, and vice versa. You know, it's about accommodating their needs in the way that they need accommodating. You know, if someone's struggling in reading and don't want to read in front of the class, I don't think it's a terrible thing to take them out of the class and have one-to-one reading until they feel comfortable going back into the class and reading in front of people. And a lot of schools sort of fail, I think, to understand that they can do that, you know, and it would be beneficial. But a lot of them are like, no, if we do that for one, then we have to do it for the other. And sometimes it's about stepping out and of those boundaries and, you know, breaking the rules to sort of help people. So, I mean, at my school, one thing I would say is I always did have a TA, which was helpful. That TA then left, and obviously with autism, it's like a whole new thing then, because it's change and getting used to somebody else and everything else. And that was difficult, you know, just getting used to a different TA because they're not going to be the same as someone else. The school did focus more on my reading. So they did start taking me out of the classroom, which is sort of what I needed. A lot of people are like, will say, oh, is that being inclusive? Is it not? And I always think it depends on the situation. I think it's inclusive from a standpoint that you're taking them out of the lesson, not to exclude them from the group, but to get them to the point where they feel comfortable to be in the group and be happy and be able to learn in a better environment. But yeah, you know, there were some things that the primary school did do that really helped, and it just did really benefit me. But I'd say at primary school, I probably only had maybe 2 teachers that understood autism. One of them was my TA, and then one of them, actually, I tell a lie, it was probably three. There was one teacher in year 5, my TA, and the PE teacher. They really sort of understood. I'd say may not have understood the condition, but they knew how the condition affected me, and I think that's really key for people to sort of know. Is I always say, the key to understanding autism is understanding how it affects the individual. And they done that with me, you know, so well. Mainstream secondary school I went into because of my educational health and care plan. They thought it'd be best for me to go into a autistic spectrum disorder unit. Obviously, the language is probably incorrect straight away from them, because it should really be autism spectrum condition. But you know, language is forever changing. But I'll be honest, they, for me, wasn't very good at all. You know, it was a mainstream school that had an ASD unit in, and I saw many autistic people get kicked out because they were getting bullied, they wasn't going to lessons, they necessarily wouldn't understand how to make friends, would say the wrong things. You know, and these people these guys just needed help, just like myself. You know, I was getting bullied and didn't want to go to classes, and instead of taking sort of sensible proceedings like, oh, let's try him in a different form, or let's try and move classroom, or let's see what's going on here. It was, no, you know, you're leaving the school, managed sort of move, and that was it. And then I went to a special educational needs school up in Oxford, and academically the school wasn't brilliant, not of any fault of their own. It was just unfortunately the environment that we were in. There was people with autism, there was people with traumatic stress, you know, there was people with, you know, had a lot of trauma in their life, was very angry about things that had happened. So the environment was, it could be volatile, it could be quite a lot different to what you'd see in a mainstream school. You know, it'd be a classroom of 6 and there'd be 20 fights a day, you know, and the school could positively handle students as well. So there was a lot of stuff at the school where we could have learned. The teachers definitely had the skills to be able to teach us, but it was just the environment we were in. Sometimes the lessons would not go that way, and because of that, the school didn't do GCSEs either. So even though the school offered a lot of support, and it's the first school that I think I went to where maybe one teacher didn't understand autism, but everyone else did. You know, obviously the academic side when I was leaving was quite difficult, because it's like, oh, you know, what am I going to do with my life if I've not got any GCSEs and everything else? So, but still, hands down, you know, the best school I went to for emotional and you know, support that I needed.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. It sounds like you've had a real, like, myriad of experiences. Like you said, there's not a lot of knowledge on you mentioned autism specifically, and it really translates to getting that just one-to-one, like, understanding, right? It's what does this child in front of me, what does this young person exactly need, and what is this condition like for them? And I think that's a really good point that you brought up, is like, it's not getting caught up in that condition or what, you know, the implications, or, you know, I think people can carry stigma on what something should look like, but it's really saying, okay, let's look at support in a different way, and let's not. I think you mentioned how schools would sort of favor conformity over getting that right support in place, and
Absolutely.
not seeing the whole picture. So I think there's so much you mentioned there that was so key that I've seen working with families as well. So thank you. One thing I just wanted to ask you from that was, you mentioned like how having teachers that understand autism and understand your experience was really helpful and nourishing. One thing I'd ask is like, what did you find helpful as a young person, kind of finding your place in the world? What did you find that it wasn't necessarily a part of schooling? That was a lot of work you had to do on your own. Was it something inherent to school? Did you kind of learn about yourself in spite of it, or?
I think the toughest wake up call for me was when I was approaching the end of school, because you start, as I said, I was in this situation where it was like, I've got no GCSEs. What am I going to do? And it was sort of no fault of my own, just because it was the school that sort of didn't do them. And I did get other vocational equivalents, but what I found was a lot of employers will just look and see that you've got functional skills, and they won't really acknowledge it as much as what a GCSE, because at the end of the day, it's just an equivalent, and it's sort of got the stereotype, just like conditions have, where functional skills is viewed as a qualification that you take because you weren't smart enough to get a GCSE, which isn't the case. It's, at the end of the day, it's an equivalent, and it's a different way of again, it's a different way of working, and a different way of how they do the papers and everything else. And it's sort of parallel to conditions. Employers will look at somebody with autism, epilepsy, ADHD, all the way to someone that might be paralysed or got cerebral palsy or anything else, and they say, well, they can't do the job just as good as any, as a normal person, and that was my biggest barrier, was going out into the workplace and sort of getting the job and learning those life skills. I mean, our school, fortunately, was very good at teaching us life skills. For instance, before I left the school, I had a national record of achievement. I had a CV ready, for me to go. There was some things that I'd speak to my mates about, and they'd say, "What's a CV?" or "What's that?" And you'd be like, "Okay, so all this stuff that's getting you all the GCSEs, but you don't know how you're ever gonna sort of put that into a real life sort of situation, and you don't know how to get yourself in that position." I think the one thing that drove me was there was a teacher at school that said, "People that say you can do anything in life are liars." And that always drove me to sort of say, "Well, no, I'm gonna prove you wrong." Because I'm a firm believer you can do whatever you want to do if you want it hard enough, and nothing comes easy. It is hard work. But it's the same of approach I've done with everything. When I wanted to be an actor and I managed to get on Holby City and play the main character for that episode. I've done the same for doctors. I've done the same for my speaking, my IT career. So, but the biggest challenge for me was going to the big wide world and sort of seeing, okay, this is going to be a lot harder. I think to a degree that we're all sort of protected from it when we were in school, and for neurotypical people it's hard, but for an autistic person, epileptic person, ADHD people with conditions, it's almost like a new world. It's a new sort of level. They've got past level 1, and now they've got to face level 2, and it's like neurotypical people have got all the cheat codes, and they sort of know how to get around it. They know the map, and for us, it's like the map changes, drastically. It's like, oh, okay, I've got to go here now. I've got to do this now. I've got to find this instead of that, and it was tricky. And even when I left school, it was the first thing I did was go to college, and I found that difficult because at school you're used to having everything. The pens in the classroom, your books. All in the classroom, at a special educational needs school. Maybe not so much at a mainstream secondary school, but at a special educational needs school, you're certainly used to being in one classroom. You're certainly used to having everything there that you need. And then suddenly you're going off to college. You've got to get a bus in the morning. You've got a timetable. You've got the bus timetable. You've got to bring your books. You've got to bring your pens. It's what lessons have I got today? What am I doing? So everything else, it was a big shock coming out of school. That was the biggest challenge for me, is going into the world and sort of seeing, oh, okay, I don't know this, but I need to find out very quickly. And some people, I think, fortunately, I was able to do that, but I can see why people find that really hard and struggle, because it is a sort of, you're on your own now sort of moment, especially when things like CAMS stop as well at such a young age. You know, it's like, well, we've given you all the help that you need, and it's like, actually, no, I probably need your help more now than I ever have had to before. But okay, the system works.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, so many interesting points there, because I liked kind of the point you mentioned earlier, which was this kind of, I guess, how educators can get into this kind of fixed mindset just due to their own training and role expectations of not creating multiple pathways or possibilities for students, and sort of, it's GCSEs or nothing, in terms of having a legitimate standing post-graduation. And that I definitely see as a barrier in general, is that we don't imagine a world that can take on many different kind of minds, neurodiverse minds. So it's interesting to hear that perspective. And what I see through the work that we do at the charity is, I think even when you do get an EHCP, and there is kind of more of a conversation around independence and life skills, it's not necessarily always working for that young person, because they don't get to define what that is. So it's quite, it's an attention in schools that I don't think really needs to exist. I think if we just keep rewriting the script for, with every young person we meet, and kind of make the opportunities available in schools a little bit more, far reaching, I think we can do a lot more. We can get a lot farther with one another. So thank you for sharing that. There's this sort of, I was doing a little research on, I think it was from this 2016 Work, Health and Disability Green Paper that was presented to Parliament. And I was kind of surprised at some of the statistics, but it kind of points out what you just mentioned, is they found, at least, this was 5 years ago, so a little outdated, but they found at least 250,000 children and young people in England in education with it was a statement of special educational needs, or an EHCP, and they found most of that portion have a learning disability or diagnosed as autistic, and many don't get the support they need to move into work. Like you were kind of mentioning, it's this black and white disparity that exists. It's this cliff edge. And they said that these young people who have an EHCP at age 15 are more than twice as likely not to be in education, employment, or training. This sort of cliff edge. So yeah, it's very interesting. And then what you mentioned about, I think it's quite, relatively little information in research, and I think in the conversation broadly, focuses on the needs of autistic adults, or the need to prepare autistic learners for adult life, and for the supports available for adults with disabilities. And here I found from this paper, it said, in fact, autistic individuals will spend the majority of their lives as adults in environments with fewer resources than the educational settings, like you mentioned.
It's absolutely true. I've done a lot of work with the Green Paper as well around 2016, because we were just doing the National Autistic Society campaign, Could You Stand the Rejection, which is on their series called Too Much Information. So at the time, there's only 16% of people in full-time work. I think that's now 22% of people now in full-time work. But one of the things we got introduced in the Green Paper as well was for the apprenticeship scheme to offer more apprenticeships, but with lower sort of qualifications, because when I was part of the all-parliamentary group up at Parliament talking about autism and my sort of story, and it took me 7 times to pass my maths level 2 in functional skills, and that was just to pass my apprenticeship. And all sort of noted that a lot of people may have given up, and they wouldn't have got a full-time job. So part of the green paper as well, which I'm sort of really proud that my story was sort of heard in, that was the qualifications dropped, so you don't need like level 2, instead you just need like level 1, which makes it a lot more accessible for people with conditions. But yeah, some of the statistics when I was working on the campaign as well, that the statistic around employment is what really made me start, doing my speeches and doing my talks, because, for me, it was 16%, and that hadn't changed for 10 years. Now it's 22, and that's just before COVID. I'll be interested to really see what that number is. But then, as you say, part of that is you still can't account for how many hours those people work or what they're getting paid, or, so there's a lot of sort of fundamental parts to it which are still not clear and still not understood. And there could be people that are not getting the same sort of benefits that a neurotypical person might get. So, I think employment and conditions and everything else sort of really needs to sort of get a lot better, improve a lot more. And I always say, we got to get it right at school level. Otherwise, everything just sort of, it's always catch up. If we can't get it right down here, how can we expect people to get it right going up throughout life? So, it's about setting that, I think, that precedent, very early on, so other people will follow. Otherwise, no one's sort of going to take that leap as into say, I'm going to be the one that does it. But that's sort of why I keep doing my talks and just raising the awareness. So people do take notice, that people will go away and talk about it at their company or at their school or wherever they are, and sort of put things in place that's going to help.
Yeah, thank you for that response. That was very thorough. And it's to I guess get at something you said earlier in your answer was, I guess it's like creating those accessible work opportunities and alternative options to enter the workplace, right? Like apprenticeships or internships. And I've been able to do some work with the post-16 offer with the local borough here in Wandsworth. Very little, because it's hard to get involved, but
I bet especially now with everything as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's complex and it's all about commissioning, and it's kind of hard to get in there as trying to represent the community. But it seems like, that's a conversation starting to be had. And you mentioned, like, if we can't get it right in school, how are we going to get it right when, a young person's left compulsory education? So it's really like, I think it's mending those mindsets that children, young people can only do this, this, this. And it's saying, like, actually, we have to create all these different levels of accessibility and inclusion. I think that's a really, really good point. And then, just to touch on what you said is, like, we're looking at the autistic employment gap at 22%, hasn't changed in 10 years. And there's still a lot of work to do looking at quality of life and satisfaction within that type of employment. So even if we can make job opportunities, internships more accessible, we have to think about you have to kind of design the workplace for different minds, right? So I think that was a really interesting thought you said there. I think it has just sort of reflecting on it, I think it really relates to narratives around sort of, if we look at the narrative of autism, the narrative of disability broadly, I think, in my opinion, I'm thinking that's one of the main barriers, in terms of addressing these things in secondary school and addressing it post-16, is like, we have these narratives about capability. I wondered if you wanted to speak to that a bit and kind of how you've encountered these narratives yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the narrative has always been, I think a lot of my life was always sort of just ruled out. You weren't really expected to sort of do much, or just get by, and that's sort of always the narrative that I run into. A lot, even in employment. I think one of the surveys that the National Autistic Society did, it actually showed that 90% of employers admitted that they wouldn't hire somebody with autism because they didn't know how to support them. So instead of trying to come in and fix the issue, and try and come up with a solution, people just avoid it. They don't want to have anything to do with it. And I always say it comes back to the thing that people, I think, would sometimes rather cure things rather than work through it, and try and understand it a bit more, because at the end of the day, for them, curing it would just be easy. It'd be like, oh, great, it's sorted. But there's nothing that needs to be cured. If anything, people just need to be more open-minded and more understanding and compassionate, and put things in place that's going to help people. Autistic people can be hard workers. They can be great people. They can be nice. They can look people in the eye. They can feel feelings for other people. And I think that's the biggest sort of narrative, is the stereotypes and everything else people always sort of believe into, and then it's sort of portrayed in other things as well, and that can be really damageful. I always think, the roles that I've done, like on television, have always been good because they've come from an authentic point of view. And I wouldn't have agreed to do them if I didn't think that it represented a true to that condition, or true to my character that I was playing. But there's so many sort of media and everything else that will go ahead and cast someone that's not even, for instance, autistic, or they hire a company that haven't had the greatest reputation when it comes to autistic advice or epilepsy advice or anything else, and it sort of all falls flat on their face because they just don't understand it enough. So I think the narrative for me has always been, well, really, that I suppose I'm not good enough and never will be. And I think there's something I always sort of try and prove people wrong, really, and try and show them that actually, no, I am. And if anything, it's people that have got to understand and support me. That's I've always said, in my eyes, if people support me, I'll support them. And it can be disheartening when you're autistic, because you try and see. You try and look at the grey areas, and you try and see, but for me, it's like no grey area in, I support you and you support me, but a lot of people don't. A lot of people just don't see that. They see it as too much work, or they have their reasons, but I always just think their reasons just aren't good enough.
Yeah, well, it's very compelling to think of it in those ways. Like, I think for a lot of, I was speaking with he's a developmental psychologist, Jamie Galpin, who I'll be bringing on next month. But he says that kind of what has begun to happen, and what's been happening is SEND and, I guess, differences in general have become like so pathologized and so specialized that we think, oh, in order to address anything, address a person with this diagnosis, I have to have a PhD, or I have to, be a specialist in this particular area. And it's not the case. Like you mentioned, it's kind of looking at how we all have underlying, universal needs. We all sort of have emotional, physical, mental needs, and perhaps they present differently when it comes to, maybe mental illness might look different for one person to the next, or, sort of communicating needs might look different. But ultimately, it just comes back to these are my needs, and you can meet me where I am. And that makes we're both better off when I think when people can have that capacity to just say, okay, I don't know a lot, but here and I can learn through this experience, right?
Exactly. I just never understand it from a point of employer, because if someone's telling you, if you do this, it will really help me in this work environment, the long-term benefit is not only for that person, but it's for the employer as well. I've been somewhere where I said, can I wear headphones while I'm working? It really helps. And the woman just turned around and went, no, you can't wear headphones. And I looked around the room and there was loads and loads of people wearing headphones. So I just said, well, everyone else is wearing headphones, why can't I? And she said, because you're in probation and they're not. So it's like, so you're going to stop me doing the one thing that actually helps me by blocking the noise out in the office, which is going to help me concentrate and get a lot more work done. But you're not going to let me do that, but you're just going to let so-and-so over there that listens to Motorhead all day, that might help his job, it might not. But for me, I'm like literally saying, this is really going to help me, but you're okay with someone else that's probably not even that bothered that they've got music on. They probably work just as hard maybe without it. It's that sort of mindset. It's like, what did that accomplish? If anything, it made me leave the role because I didn't feel understood, and it then meant that they had to spend more money getting someone in. It then meant that they had to re-advertise. It then meant when it's like, I'll bring my own headphones in. It's not costing you any money. What's the problem here? And it's just small things like that. That it's like at the end of the day, it's going to help me, and therefore it's going to help you. And if you're not going to be understanding, then that's not going to help me, and it's not going to help you either. I think a lot of employers make the mistake of not spending money to help people, even if it is a small amount of money, because they just don't want to spend money. And then what ultimately happens is that person doesn't feel understood. They don't feel valued. They end up going somewhere else, and it costs them more money anyway, because then they got to re-advertise for the role and get someone in that they might end up paying more money for. It's such a backwards sort of way of moving forward. I think, again, that's another narrative, is employers just don't want to spend money and they think it's going to be a lot of hard work, so they'd probably rather avoid the situation in the first place. And if they don't avoid the situation, they still don't want to spend the money, which ultimately means that person doesn't get the support that they need anyway.
The theme of avoidance is quite prevalent in schools, and I won't speak for all employers, but maybe these employers that are stuck in kind of fixed mindsets, it's just like, this is just the way it's been going for this long, and I'm not going to adjust. And I think it damages, it does a lot of damage in that way. Not only do you not allow that individual's perspective to take up any space, to make that impact in the work, or to feel comfortable enough in the classroom. But it's it does so much more in the long term. I
mean, currently where I work at the minute, they are just completely the reverse. They are supportive, they are helpful, they understand my needs, they understand my condition, and therefore I work, not that I don't work hard, not that I wouldn't work harder at the other places anyway, but it gives you that more motivation to actually want to try your hardest, because you're surrounded by people that care, and you're surrounded by people that understand. And when you're in that environment, you just want to give as much as you can, because you know that they give back, and that they care. And when you're in a place where it's like, sorry, you can't even have headphones because you're in probation, you sort of start questioning, okay, why am I here anyway?
Yeah.
But yeah, as you say, it's sort of the closed-mindedness, as you said, of some employers.
Yeah. So with that said, how can someone learn? So an employer or a teacher, I guess we can broaden this. How can someone learn to support you best in a certain environment? So without jumping to conclusions about what you need or just ignoring it completely. How does that work for you? How has that worked for you?
The best way I've got support is for the people to look at me as an individual first, and then apply the conditions afterwards. Instead of applying the condition first, then the person. If you apply the condition first, you can get trapped in those sort of stereotypes. You can sort of get trapped in, oh, well, maybe he doesn't feel this way, or maybe he can't look people in the eye. And if you get to know the person first, you'll soon see that, you know, they can do this, they can do that. If anything, you'll go through the list of autistic traits afterwards, and then you'll go, oh, we can do that, he can do this, oh, we can do that. As if you go in reading the traits beforehand, you're going to always sort of be looking for, oh, can he do that, can he not? And you might then miss the things that that person can or can't do. And it's sort of that for me is really key, is anyone who's been able to support me, and the best support I've got is when I've had people that have got to know me and understood me before the condition, and then they understand the condition because they know how it affects me. It's important knowing as well, it's that famous old saying, you know, when you've met one person with autism, you know, you've met one person with autism. That can be the complicated thing. You know, there could be one thing that works for me that might not work for another autistic person. Some people with autism love speaking. Some autistic people wouldn't want to get up and do public speaking. So it's always sort of running into those areas. There's going to be autistic people out there that probably, you know, are part of the stereotype of autistic people are really good at maths. You know, there's probably some autistic people out there that are really good at maths. Me, it took me 7 times to pass. You would not want me doing your books. You know, it'd be a nightmare. So it's just understanding how it really affects that individual, and using every available resource that you can, whether that's parents. I mean, parents, I think, are the most untapped resource out there. The amount of times that teachers did things at school and they didn't know why it upset me, they could have just asked my mum, and my mum could have went, oh, that's why. And they would have just went, oh. Instead, they would spend time guessing or thinking that's odd, that's weird, why is he doing that, or why is he doing this, and not actually ever come to an answer, because they're too fixed on, they're too pinpointed on why, you know. And instead of going out and finding the answer, some people just stay on why, and go, oh, I don't know. You know, we say it all the time, oh, you know, who knows? We might see things every day and go, why is he doing that? Oh, I don't know. And then it's just left. And that sometimes happens with conditions. You know, it could just be one phone call to a parent. You know, why is your daughter? Oh, why does your son do this? It's like, and plus you might be educating the parents as well, because it could be something that they do at school that they never do at home. And then you can sort of pinpoint, oh, okay, so what is it about a school environment that is making this person do that versus a home environment? You know, and it's about sort of learning that together. I think from the employment side of things as well, it's not expecting them to be one like every autistic person or epileptic person or ADHD person I've ever met, but it's also knowing that they're not going to be like every neurotypical person either. You know, I've always said, you know, for me, the key to understanding is really just understanding the individual, and then you can sort of, time by time, you can start putting things in place that are going to help them. I think if anything, I'm trying to think of what my current employer would probably have learnt from me, and it's probably that I like to double check everything because I like to be thorough, and it's probably a bit of my OCD, but I like to make sure I've done something properly, so they understand that things might take a little bit longer. You know, it's not an issue. It's not like, oh, you know, this is a real problem. It's actually, you know, about recognizing, okay, Max, I know you like to thoroughly check everything, but we really need this done by today. Do you think you can do it? If you can, great. If you can't, don't worry, you know, because we're here and we can do that bit, and you can help us with this bit that might not take, you know, the time that it needs to be done. Instead of just going, oh, you can't do it that quick, bye. You know, it's about understanding them, you know. And I think when you work with somebody, you know, I mean, I've been with my employer now for 8 months, and I think they probably have understood me more than what most places have done, you know. And I've worked some places for over a year, you know, and I'd say where I am currently, I probably understand me a lot more than some of the other places. So I think it's about taking that time, having those conversations, trying things, and just seeing if they work or not, and letting that person know it's okay if it doesn't work, or, you know, that you're not there to judge them. You're just there to get a bit of an idea of what they can do to support you, and what, you know, because that's another sort of frame of language that we always fall into, which is, you know, we're just testing it to see what you can do, and it's a bit like, well, no, it's not about what I can do, because I can do it. It's just you probably don't. It's not quick enough, or it's not the way that you want it. So sometimes it's about the employer changing their language and just going, it's not to see what you can do. It's actually to see how we can support you doing it, you know, and what we can do to make that better for you. Because I think a lot of the shoe ultimately always falls on the autistic person's foot, and I've never agreed with it, and I've always put it down to, it's like saying to somebody in a wheelchair, why can't you get into the building? Well, there's no ramp. Well, it's not our problem. And it's like, well, hang on. You've employed me. You knew of what you were employing. You know, you knew of me. You knew what I've got, how I am. For me, it's simply not good enough for an employer to turn around and go, we don't know how to support you. And it's like, well, you'd be very quick if it was somebody in a wheelchair or anything else, you know. So yeah. But because it is invisible condition, as you know, it often doesn't get looked at. You know, often does get forgotten about, because it's sort of out of sight, out of mind. A lot of people fall victim to that, I think.
Yeah, it's so many sort of key things you mentioned. It's just like inclusion being a two-way street. It's ongoing, you know, it's collaborative, and you know, it's this active experience. And it's having that humility to say, I don't know your lived experience. And, you know, you have sophisticated knowledge on your lived experience, as does your parent, probably, your parent or carer. So I'm going to make the work less on me, and sort of just take what's already there and allow you to guide, right? I mean, it seems like that seems to be the direction that's worked for you, and I think perhaps many others. So I just wanted to end, I think I'll end on one last question that might be useful for our young people and families watching. So it might be a big question, but we'll see. What advice might you give an autistic, or you can say neurodivergent young person broadly, entering the workforce?
It's a good question. I would say never underestimate yourself, never undervalue yourself. You are just as good as any other person that is there, that is working there. Never beat yourself up because you've got a condition that might make you think differently, or might make you do things differently, because there is no right or wrong way. Right and wrong is only determined by what everyone else is doing. And if we look back years and centuries ago, there's a lot of things that people were doing that we now look at and go, that was bad. So, you know, never determine what you're doing is wrong on the basis of what everyone else is doing, because, you know, it's people like that that are thinking outside the box, that are actually coming up with solutions and fixing problems, instead of people just being sort of programmed in a way of, this is how we do something and this is how it must get done. The other thing I would say as well is, and I know many people will do it, because I think when you have someone with a condition, I do believe that I think there's a standard thing where people with conditions often work harder because they want to sort of prove to other people that they can work just as good as anyone else. And that's certainly something I've done throughout my career. So, you know, obviously work hard and continue to do that, but don't let it drive you down or put you down if you feel like you're not succeeding or you're not getting to where you are, because, you know, you're probably underestimating yourself again in that same situation. You know, you're probably thinking you're doing a lot worse than what you are. And I'd say just always know there's nothing wrong, like, with you. You know, it's the world that's got to change. It's the world that's got to start understanding its employers, its education, it's the people around us that have got to start understanding, being a bit more compassionate and being a bit more caring. You know, it's not you. And that's the other thing I'd say is, when approaching employment, make sure you are joining somewhere that understand that you are going to need things, you're going to need support, you're going to need a bit of help, and that's okay. Because I'd rather, and if you get turned down from employers, you know, just don't let it discourage you. Just keep going, because you'll find that one employer that's really good and really great, and that's going to help you and support you, and vice versa. You're going to help them and support them as well. But you're going to find that one employer that does that, and it'd be the best place that you work, instead of trying to conform and be something that you're not, and be let down by employer after employer, which can become quite discouraging. So, you know, always just be honest and be upfront. Tell them what you're going to need, what support you're going to have, and let them know that just because you got a condition doesn't mean that you're going to need, you know, 24-hour, you know, sort of support. And if you do, that's fine as well, you know. But it's just about letting them know where you're at, and being honest about that. And, you know, the main thing is, it's not so much about what you've got to do, but it's about what they've got to do. So, you know, my advice to employers out there would be to hire people with conditions, because they are hardworking, and they are going to be those people that, you know, drive your business in the right way. And not only they're missing out on working at a great environment and a great company, but also you're missing out on having a great employee. So that would be my advice.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So I think now I'll turn it over to our Q&A. So if anyone watching has questions they'd like to present to us, you can write it in the chat on the right-hand side. We'll wait a few moments for you to do that. If you want to send your questions in at a later point, that's okay too. We can continue the conversation on. So I'll just give a few moments for that. It's hard to tell. Okay, I think if everyone feels content, I can wrap up the session. So just want to say thank you so much, Max, for your time and your energy tonight. It was wonderful to speak with you on this very important subject.
Thank you for having me as always. I love coming on, talking with Centaur and working with you guys. So, thank you for having me again.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'll close out. Thank you to those who've watched presently and in the future. Happy to continue the conversation and the discussion. So and to continue sort of talks just like this. So if you want to hear more about employment or reasonable adjustments or EHCPs or anything in that realm, contact us here and we can talk about that. I have an impact form that allows us to look at kind of, was this talk helpful, and what we can be doing going forward to kind of make sure that this visibility continues and that people get the right support going forward. So I'll say good night now and good evening. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.